Okie dokie. I think we're almost there. I think it's almost that time. Let's just take a look, make sure everything's going okay. You know? I think it's almost that time. Let's just adjust something. All right, it should be fun. Let's see how it goes. Just get everything shared, and we will get this show a rolling, even a minute early, even potentially, possibly, maybe. All right. Okie dokie. Almost there. Okie dokie. Well, I think that's everything in terms of the getting going. So we might as well get going just a smidgen, just a tad early. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever we are. What are we? What is this? So I am not Dr. Patrick Lockwood for the purpose of this particular podcast. I am just Patrick. This is UnShrink Me. And if you are new here, UnShrink Me is merely just a forum to discuss all of the pros and cons of clinical psychology, therapy, and related topics from an academic perspective as well. The whole spirit of UnShrink Me, if you're brand new, is just to criticize what's wrong and discuss what makes sense purely for the sake of informing the consumers, because the public are often harmed by my profession and the related professions. So psychiatry, psychology, psychologists, licensed clinicians of all degree levels harm patients, or at best don't help people because they're just ignorant or biased or don't understand what we're here to do for real. And so the idea basically is, if we could, essentially have a more informed consumer base, maybe they could make better decisions about the clinicians they seek out, or about the services they seek out, or just about their self-understanding, because I think patient self-understanding is very important for effective therapy, effective psychology, mental health practice in general. So that is the spirit of UnShrink Me. Thank you so much for coming out. I see we have some folks online. Feel free to comment and chat, and we can joke around and mess around, and everything will be good. Please don't sue me. This is just my opinion. I am not a representative of the businesses to which I'm associated. I am not a representative of the university at which I teach, and I'm extremely grateful for the various people that support me. This is a podcast which is unofficially not sponsored by Celsius, but I do love it because it tastes good. And theoretically, it's kind of good for me. There's supposedly vitamins in there. Supposedly. So we'll see. But anyways, welcome to UnShrink Me. So we have some fun stuff on the docket for today's podcast. Feel free to chime in at any time. For those of you who are new, I try my best to reference the things that I'm talking about. And I try to retweet things at the time that I'm discussing them, so you know exactly who I'm referring to, so you can go fact check me, etc., and chime in. We have a chat already. Jonathan Cogburn says, "Don't tell me what to do. Such a Texan you are. Such an independent you are. How dare you push back on me on my YouTube channel?" I'll get offended if you keep pushing back on me, Jonathan. No, it's great. Glad you're here and look forward to your comments and your questions. First and foremost today, first thing I'd like to discuss, if I have the time. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, let's start with this. So one thing that I think is really important is AI in higher education. So there's this thing, and I'll repost this right now so you know why I'm talking about this. Okay. So a couple of days ago, there was a post out by a guy named Steve McQuire about a week and a half ago, that says higher education, AI's takeover is a full-blown existential crisis. College is just how well I can use ChatGPT at this point, is a quote from the article. And so here's the truth about that. Before I give my opinion, just one more quote from the article. I think we are years or months probably away from a world where nobody thinks using AI for homework is considered cheating. So, as a professor, I care a great deal about higher education. And, teaching the next generation of clinicians how to think, teaching people how to be better academics, more scientifically minded people is extremely important to me. And so I share a lot of the concerns about AI that most people do in higher education. Other departments, I think, are more fucked than clinical psychology because of just the nature of what the type of writing and the type of assignments and the type of thinking they want people to do. But clinical psychology still has some challenges ahead of itself. And I was actually talking with my colleagues about this over some libations yesterday after graduation. Congrats to all the kids who graduated from my university. Proud of you. But we hung out, we had some drinks, and we talked about this. And, our approach, I think my department's approach is going to be a pretty reasonable one. And I think that most people, if they're sane and if they're adults, they can find a way to work with AI. I think that if you're going to let a large language model destroy your model of teaching, then your model sucks, in my opinion. Because there's absolutely a way to educate people in your various disciplines while working with AI. I think it's just like cell phones and computers and all the other new technology. I think if you're a coward or if you're an idiot, you can't fully understand the importance of working with technology. And again, I'm not saying I like these large language models in the way that students will be cheating with them, because I see that, and I see plagiarism getting out of control, and I see all sorts of problems. I see all the problems that are referenced in all these fear porn think pieces, like the one I retweeted. So I'm not ignorant, I'm not stupid about this. It's just that I think that if you're really a good professor, if your model of education actually makes sense and can keep up with the 21st century, then you shouldn't be that worried. I think you should have reasonable expectations and reasonable standards. So, for instance, if you're a good professor and you actually have good relationships with your students, you should be able to have a conversation that goes something like, hey, listen, these tools like ChatGPT, etc., are great. And maybe if you're going to use them to refine your writing or to fact check your writing or whatever it is, there's probably no particular problem with that, provided that you're doing the initial footwork and you're actually making it awesome yourself. Fine, that's fine. There's a way to do that, because if you actually care as a professor, what you're trying to teach your students is critical thinking within your domain of specific knowledge and expertise. So there's no AI that's going to do better clinical work than me, because I'm a person and people respond to people in therapy. But AI might be able to do is give me answers to questions from a technical or an academic perspective quicker than my brain might pull up in the middle of session, which is what physicians would use it for, and so on and so forth. So differential diagnosis and clinical thinking aren't going to be affected by AI. What will be affected is how we use the tools to improve our practice or to improve our critical thinking process. But if you're letting AI do the thinking for you, or if you're an academic who's just going to roll over and take it, while your students cheat, then you're the problem, not AI. And so what I would encourage everyone who either is in higher education or runs higher education is to think about how to use these tools effectively, right? Once upon a time, no one dared had their computer in classrooms. Back in my day when I was a kid, computers weren't allowed in classrooms at all. Now in primary school, in college, in graduate school, everyone has a laptop or an iPad on their desk, and they're using it to help themselves answer questions effectively, hopefully, unless they're scrolling on Instagram or whatever the fuck they're doing. But the problem is, if you suck as a professor, if you suck at forming relationships, if you suck at having boundaries, if you suck at not actually being an adult, then yeah, AI is going to take over your job, and the kids are going to just run rampant over you. So really what I would worry about is the fact that, universities are not full of adults, right? There are many universities that are full of children or adolescents who are masquerading as adults who happen to have a PhD or an EDD or a PsyD or whatever it is, who don't know what they're actually doing, but they want to help people, or they want to be educators, or they just want to listen to themselves talk or some shit like that. And they're not actually good professors or academics. Maybe they're good researchers, or maybe they're good administrators, but they're not actually good at doing their job of engaging students. And so if you actually do suck at engaging students, or maybe your university has done a bad job of admitting the right kind of people into your program, or maybe both, then of course AI and large language models scare you. But maybe you should look in the mirror and figure it out, because I'm not worried. My colleagues are not worried. We're annoyed at some of the things we have to do to safeguard our process, but that's called being an adult and evolving with the time. So maybe people in higher education need to grow the fuck up, but that's just me. All right, next thing, and maybe that will give me some scorn. We'll see. Next thing. One of my favorite accounts on Twitter is this person named No BS Therapist. Her handle is @TweetATherapist. So she found this, I think, Reddit post from Our Parenting, which is horrific. Anything on Reddit is horrific, but this one in particular is. So she responded to this 4 days ago, and I also commented. So I'm just going to retweet it right now so we all know what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's what the Reddit post says. The title of it is, "Why Does My Son Invite a Girl Over and Go Up to His Room for 5 minutes?" And the subheading is Adult Children 18 plus years, which I don't know why that is. So anyways, here's what the post says. "I hate to be in my son's business, but I'm very confused because we will be having dinner or just around the house doing whatever, and some girl will come in. We will say hi, and they would go up to his room for 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes later, he's walking her out the door. I'd say this is just him hooking up with random girls, but it's been the same girl once before already. Same thing happened the last time with her. What do you think is going on? ? I think it's hooking up, but that would be a shame to be bringing a girl upstairs for 5 minutes. And then there's an edit which says, "Thank you guys for the help!" ! IDK how I didn't see drugs being an option. As I've raised him to be against all of those things, I guess sometimes it just doesn't work. Frowny face. Another thing is the first time she left quick, he told me she just had to leave suddenly. And then the second time I could intervene because she was already out the door by the time I could have. I will catch this the third time. And yes, he is almost 21. And I don't want to push boundaries too harshly without also reminding him he is under my roof. So, No BS Therapist said, how not to parent. And here's what I will say, both as someone who's run rehabs and mental health programs. If this is a real post, what this speaks to is your pretty classic, ignorant parent who for some reason is feckless in a way that makes no sense to me. But there are, unfortunately, a great many parents like this. So if you've got a kid and the kid's either hooking up or doing drugs or whatever it is, and you don't have the basic common sense and the common decency to have a real relationship with them and ask them what they're doing, you failed at this point. Because I get that you can have fear and trauma that keeps you from wanting to confront people or have a real conversation with them. But here's the deal. As an adult, as a parent, you have an ethical obligation to have boundaries with your kid. Something I do in my family support group on Thursday nights is help parents have boundaries, you know? And there are things you can do to repair things and improve and do better. So you may have failed in the past, but there's a lot you can do right now. And again, this is Reddit, so it could be fake, or it could be trolling, or it could be engagement bait, or whatever it is, or it could be real. It could be a real parent who just doesn't know what the hell they're doing, which is unfortunately a lot of people, because a lot of people have ceded all sorts of emotional and psychological territory to their kids. And they use excuses like, well, my kid's an adult, so I don't want to encroach on their space. But like, if it's your house and you have an adult child living with you, A, what's that about? Is it money? Are they not capable of living on their own? What is that? But B, why don't you have ground rules, right? In every relationship, there are rules. Some of them are explicit and some of them are implicit, but it's just not okay if you are a parent to have zero boundaries or zero explicit discussions of the boundaries with your kid, right? Like, you wouldn't do that in a romantic relationship. You wouldn't do it in a friendship. You wouldn't do it in a professional relationship. It is absolutely bonkers to me. And I've done this for a decade now, at least, where I've walked families through in family therapy or in interventions, the fact that they have no boundaries, and this lack of boundaries is part of why their kid is so fucked off. It's not the cause, but it certainly isn't helping. So we never, in my opinion, if you're a good clinician, a good interventionist, you never blame the parents. Everyone in a family system is responsible for everyone's outcome because we all interact with each other. We all affect each other. We are interdependent systems, family systems, right? So it's not like one person alone is responsible when it comes to bad boundaries. It's everyone plays a role. One of the most famous versions of this is an academic named Carol Wegscheider Cruz, who came up with the so-called family roles theory. And this is something that's like 50 years old at this point. The idea is everyone plays a role. Some people are a hero. Some people are enablers. Some people are lost children. Some people are scapegoats. Some people are mascots. But like, everyone plays a role in a family system, in a culture. This is true in universities. This is true in classrooms. This is true in treatment centers. This is true in family systems. This is true in any community. We all play specific roles, and these roles help negotiate family tension and family mismanagement. And the problem is that if your role is, let's say, exaggerated, or if there's an imbalance of power, or if the hierarchy doesn't make sense, to go back to structural family therapy, then there's going to be chaos and there's going to be mismanaged emotions and there's going to be boundary problems. And so you have to clarify your role and have boundaries that make sense for your culture and for your context. Jonathan says, how is inquiry about his activities moving him toward independent living or not moving him toward that, if that's even a goal for his mom? That's a good question. So to go back to the Reddit post specifically after my tangent here, it may or may not be important to engage in inquiry. Like, who cares what he's doing necessarily? But like, you should have a boundary, which is if you are doing X and X behavior is inappropriate or unacceptable, then there's going to be a consequence, right? Very simply put. I think asking could make some sense if you have a specific goal in mind, right? So like, if it's the case that he is doing drugs and you want your home to be a drug-free home, then you should be asking, and then you should be setting a boundary of some kind. There should be a consequence delivered based upon the boundary you're setting. But, if you don't care, if you just want to know because you're anxious or neurotic, then who cares and why are you asking, right? So I think it depends upon what the goal of the mom is. I think this idea that it's my house or whatever, it's a rhetoric you hear from parents. I've heard it for about a decade in my career at least. And it's not weird because parents do want to be authority figures, but oftentimes they're very afraid to be authority figures. And it's very sad because otherwise intelligent and capable people feel a sense of cowardice or feel a sense of intense fear separate from cowardice because they have been abused by their kids or they've allowed their kids to upend the power structure because of whatever pathological reasons, or sometimes it's because of normal ignorance. I think something that a lot of people in the culture wars don't get, and my years of working with very mentally ill young people, young adults between the ages of 15 and 30, is a lot of times people shit on parents for having bad boundaries because it's like, you should know better. You're so smart, or you're so successful. Why don't you know better? But like, the truth of the matter is, being a great lawyer or a great scientist, or in many cases even a great clinician, doesn't mean you're actually good at being a parent, right? Like, a lot of these successful people who are like really doing well or wealthy or whatever it is are horrific parents because they came from shitty backgrounds themselves. And so they hyper focused on work, or they hyper focused on success or whatever it was, because they didn't have a good personal life in their childhood. And that's not weird. It's just people compensate. And so there is, like, back to Hanlon's razor, there is either ignorance or malice. And for the most part, attribute not to malice that which you can attribute to ignorance. And a lot of parents are genuinely ignorant. You know, it's like they didn't grow up in a circumstance where they were taught the right thing, or they weren't, affected by role models appropriately. Or, like most parents, I'm going to do the opposite of what happened to me because what happened to me was so stupid or bad, etc. All of which is kind of normal, unfortunately. And so I think that we need to give parents a break in some respects, because a lot of it's just ignorance and they don't know any better. And there's a lot of real stressors that parents face, like having to work multiple jobs, or, being in this really fucked up society that says that you need to kill yourself for your kids when there doesn't seem to be much of a future there, or because, your friends suck, or your parents yourself suck. It's just, there's a lot of normal influences that people take for granted or minimize when they're trying to shit on parents in the culture wars. And I understand it because I have my own criticisms, but at the same time, it's hard to be a parent. It's hard to have hope and faith and believe that things will be okay. And so as much as I think it's easy to beat up on this Reddit post, it's also the case that, like, we don't know who this person really is. We don't know what her parents were like. We don't know any of these things. And so it's like, it's all fantasy at this point. But it's good bait. I took it. So that's that. All right. Moving right along. Okie dokie. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Found an interesting post last week that said Instagram's AI chatbots are lying about being licensed therapists. Well, that's good. That's encouraging. I hope Instagram's AI therapists stop lying about being licensed therapists. All right. Okie dokie. Let's talk about this guy named Nick Tabor for a second. Let me retweet it right now. Nick's an interesting creature. So Nick made a post about 5 days ago, and his handle is at NICKTABER. He said, something I've heard over and over again is that a therapist is necessary to heal because healing is relational. Let's suppose this was true. Is the only way to be relational to see a therapist? Just because you're not seeing a therapist doesn't mean you're living in a cave. This is one of those great all or nothing kinds of posts where it's like either you see a therapist and you're perfectly healed or you're fucked, is kind of what he's saying. So Nick, my buddy Nick, I would love to talk with you about this either in a podcast or in a more formal setting. We can record it, we can edit it, I don't care. But here's the deal, Nick. I think that's a straw man because even the most incompetent therapists that I've met, and I live in Los Angeles, there's so many incompetent people here, just because there's so many people per capita who do the work. So Nick is creating a straw man. I think maybe just because he's frustrated or he was hurt by a clinician or who knows what. I don't particularly care at this point. But the problem is that that straw man doesn't pan out because most clinicians, again, even the most incompetent of them, actually know that there are multiple types of relationships that can help you heal. You know, like for instance, it's definitely the case that most people in the profession, psychiatrists, psychologists, LMFTs, LPCCs, whatever, all understand that you need like healthy friends and healthy family and healthy love and sex, and a spiritual life is usually a good thing. And so there's like a great many types of relationships that help you heal as a person. So I think most people in our profession, even the dumbest of them and the stupidest of them, understand that you need lots of relationships to be seen and heard and understood and to help with healing. I don't know where he gets that idea from. Maybe he interacted with a really narcissistic therapist who thought they were, the most amazing, most insightful, most helpful person. That's possible because there are some really sick people in our profession who think that way. But I think all of us know that relationships help you heal. I think all of us know that whatever healing actually means to you, because I think that's a very loaded pop psychology word, honestly, at this point. You can have multiple types of relationships that allow you to feel better and allow you to have a new relationship with your self-concept or with your coping skills or your sense of self-agency or your personality or whatever construct works for you. Like, my opinion is that, there's really just so many different ways to slice this cake and get the cat skinned, No offense to my cats. I don't think I'll be skinning them, but like, I believe that there's definitely no particular concept that makes the most sense. It's a question of which concepts work for you, right? So if you're like me, I think personality is a very important construct, which I'll talk about in another post here. So for me, it's like if you're a temperamentally very conscientious person or a temperamentally very extroverted person, then those personality differences are going to dictate to some important degree how you function in the world, which means that you need to accommodate your relation to yourself based upon those personality differences. Because if you just ignore the fact that you're super temperamentally extroverted, you're at the 95th percentile, and you just try to live alone or live without relationships, you're going to be miserable. And you're not going to heal even with the best therapist. So you need to go out and have lots of interactions with people if you're a temperamentally very extroverted person, right? Also, if you look at the relationship between trait extroversion from the 5-factor model and mental health in general, it appears that even if you are temperamentally more introverted, you still need to put yourself out there and go have more interpersonal engagement and just do it more mindfully compared to the extrovert. And so what I would say is that Nick is full of shit or just very biased based upon his personal experiences or some gurus that hurt him or something like that. Nick, I would invite you to talk to other professionals because although there are some stupid people who are very bad at what they do or very full of themselves, most people in the profession aren't so stupid and so ignorant that they think only they can help you heal. Also, there are some specific examples, scenarios where maybe you have such horrific trauma or maybe you have such horrific neglect or whatever it is in your past that maybe the best way to start your healing process is in a confidential clinical relationship because that's the safest way to get started for some people. And then as you get more grounded and you build some more resilience and some more calluses, you can then go try to experiment with other healthy relationships that will help you on your healing journey, whatever that actually means. So I think that there's so many nuances and complexities to it that Nick is creating this straw man because he probably had a bad experience is my guess, but I don't know. But, Nick, I'm out here if you ever want to have a chat. Let me know. All right, moving right along. This has been fun so far. I'm going to take a break from clinical psychology particular and therapy and just talk a little culture war for just a second. All right. So there's a meme or a quote tweet or whatever that was making the rounds earlier this week on Twitter or X or whatever, which I think is just something that needs to be discussed because I think it does relate to mental health. And I'm going to retweet it right now. And the topics here are like gratitude and lifestyle and health and mental health. Okay. So what I just reposted is from a guy named Ben Dreyfuss. His handle is at BenDreyfuss. Ben's funny. He's like a culture warrior. Anyways, the post goes like this. Here's what Ben said. So many tweets on this website are people describing the almost unimaginable level of comfort and prosperity enjoyed in this country and then being like, but it sucks. So let me read the screenshot that he's criticizing with what he said. So the person who posted this, I don't know who this person is, but their handle is at Murray, MurrayHillGuy, one, at Murray Hill Guy 1. So his post, Murray's post was, work a desk job, grind 9 to 6, lift weights to feel something, marry someone beautiful enough, move to the suburbs, get a dog, have 2 kids, drive an American SUV to Costco on the weekends, buy a house you'll never finish paying off, call it happiness. Then he says, is this a dream after that list of things? Is this a dream or just a life we were sold? So, I have my own opinions about corporatism and hustle and grind culture. I have some criticisms of our very consumerist, hyper-consumerist lifestyle here in the West that I think is actually bad for mental health and bad for society. So I'm not fully going to rail against Murray, if that is your real name. So I'm not completely against this idea of like this fake Pleasantville lifestyle. Here's the problem, and I agree with Ben in this regard. Also, like, what the fuck does it mean to have marry someone beautiful enough? Like, isn't that hitting the jackpot, evolutionarily speaking? Finding someone you find attractive who wants to spend the rest of their life with you? I don't know. Lifting weights is a good thing. Working a desk job, which is like living in the safest, most comfortable way possible. Crazy. And Jonathan, in the chats here, Jonathan says, I'd much rather do any of those things than not know whether or not I was going to be able to feed my family personally. Exactly. Excuse me. It's unfathomable to criticize, on the one hand, perhaps the most comfortable, to use a culture war word, privileged lifestyle possible, which is to work a safe job where you're not going to get stabbed, you're not going to break your leg, you're not going to get killed, whatever. You're not like working on an oil rig somewhere or in a coal mine or whatever. You're like sitting at a desk like I am right now, talking to people. Like, this is about as cushy as it gets, evolutionarily and historically speaking. So I would say having kids, having someone who loves you, who you find attractive, having a dog. I have 2 cats I love. I had a dog as a kid. I loved him. Duncan, I miss you. Driving a car that's good for you and gets you where you need to go, that's not going to break down every 3,000 miles. And like buying a house you'll never pay off, sure. I'm all about like, we have all sorts of housing problems and greed problems and there's all sorts of issues there, which, I have student loans I might never pay off. Like, who knows, right? But like, I have criticisms of society, of hyper-consumerism, of corporatism, of the oligarchs that run this country. I think we live in this really weird matrix, AI, fake just to keep the rich kind of society. I agree that that's a real thing. And at the same time, I couldn't be in a more comfortable circumstance, comparatively speaking, compared to like 50 years ago, or even like 40 years ago, or even like 30 years ago. If we wind the clock back to the 90s, obviously I probably could have paid off a house if I graduated and got my degree then. And I probably wouldn't have the insane student loans that I have right now. But like the technology I have right now, the access to comfort that I have right now, the access to information that I have right now is unparalleled compared to the 1990s. And it's insane. The access to food that we have right now, the access to resources, the access to wealth, it's better than it's ever been. And so for people like this, it's probably just engagement bait, or he's probably just some kind of cuck who doesn't understand how good his life is, who lacks gratitude. Maybe he has no God. Maybe he has no sense of existential meaning. I don't know. But like, if you really care about yourself, if you really care about the people around you, you should be able to find gratitude and find a way to make your life better and stop bitching about it, right? Like, as much as I complain about certain out of control things in my life online about government, society, greed, whatever it is, I'm actively doing something right now to make my life and the people's lives around me better. I'm not sitting there and bitching and masturbating. I'm going out there and doing things, creating businesses, helping people as a clinician, teaching the next generation of clinicians as a professor. Like, I'm actually doing shit. And so if you're going to bitch online and not go do something to improve your life, you're the problem. Right? And we have, unfortunately, there's an entire segment of the population that are just spectators who feel disempowered, or they don't believe that they can do something right now to make their life better. But like, the simplest thing any human being, this is my hot take for the day, the simplest thing that any human being can do to make their life better is to get themselves healthier right now. Sleep better, eat better, exercise more, have more fun, laugh more, have better relationships with your family and friends, have more sex. Do the things that make your life more meaningful, that actually make you healthier, right? Have a better relationship with yourself. Be less egotistical. Be appropriately humble. Be appropriately grateful. Be appropriately aware of who you are, what your strengths are, and what your flaws are. Having a healthier relationship with yourself, having a healthier relationship with your body is going to make your life better, your family's life better, and society better. And the people who think, I'm just going to bitch and then keep being a selfish asshole and just like be ungrateful about my life, they're part of the problem. And these are spectators. I call them spectators. And so maybe Murray is a spectator, or maybe Murray's doing something good for society. I don't know. I don't know who this person is, so I can't really judge. But the people who talk like that and then don't do anything to make life better for themselves and other people, the people who don't go start a business, the people who don't go improve their health or improve their relationships or treat themselves better or treat other people better, those people are spectators. They're selfish, egotistical spectators. And it's bad for society to be a spectator. You can be as traumatized as the next person and still go do something to better your life and better the lives of people around you. I work with extremely mentally ill people who are less selfish than the people that post like Murray, who get out of their own head and be of service to other people. And it's insane how you can be mentally ill or have a serious drug addiction or both and do something to give back to society and not bitch about it. And there's tons of very ill people. There's people who've lost limbs in the war. There's people who have lost family and friends who actually show up and do more for society than these very comfortable spectators who pretend that their comfortable, privileged life is not good. And it's just insane to me. It's just there's a lack of humility. There's a lack of understanding and perspective for a lot of people. And it's probably just they come from a culture where, they think they're entitled to more comfort not having to do anything about it. And it's actually going to make themselves sick. Like, that's basically resentment mentality. And resentment is dangerous for you and everybody else. I don't know I hate to say this, but like Jordan Peterson, just to name a particular culture warrior, is completely correct about this. He's not original. He's stealing it from AA and a bunch of other places and philosophy and stuff and religion. But like, resentment is bad for you. Being resentful of your very comfortable life makes you sick, and it makes the people around you sick. And it's selfish and it's egotistical. Excuse me. And so the resentment you have might be valid in the sense that like maybe you were genuinely wronged by somebody or by society, and go do something about it, right? Just sitting on your resentment is going to make you sick. So maybe don't be so sick. I don't know. What would I know? So that's that. So takeaway is, if you have a resentment, if you're resentful about your very comfortable, privileged lifestyle, maybe go do something to make it better or make the lives of other people better. Maybe get out of yourself and go help somebody. Okay, let's talk about clinical psychology again after that. Okay, so I'm going to retweet it right now. There's a person named at DRGIPPS, at Dr. Gibbs. Dr. Gibbs said today or yesterday, so is personality disorder mental illness or not, and why? This is probably one of those very complicated questions that deserves a lot of conversation. Love you too, Bobby. So, clinicians, competent clinicians who are not morons, think of personality in three different types of ways, basically. So there's various types of personality traits you can research, like the 5-factor model of personality, or trait sensation seeking, or, there's dozens and dozens of traits we've researched in the literature, even trait narcissism and things like that. Keith Campbell, for instance. So there's lots of really cool research on different types of personality traits. And traits are real things that we think are influencing the way people show up. And I think it's a very useful way of looking at the problem. Here's the issue. We need to deal with this like adults here. There is a difference, in my opinion, between a personality disorder, a personality style, and various personality traits. Because you can have a personality disorder, you can have a personality style, or you can just have some personality traits. So for instance, just to name a very simple example, some people literally have a personality disorder. They're diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. Other people do not have a diagnosable disorder, but they have a personality style, which involves some traits from these categories of pathological disorders. Other people will just have some traits, right? So just to name an example, sometimes I have patients who are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. Also, sometimes I have patients who appear to be narcissistically organized, which means that maybe they're temperamentally a little more grandiose, or they're more, interested in their sense of self compared to other people, or they think more highly of themselves on average compared to the other people, or they're more histrionic. They have a more big sense of who they are. They're very interested in getting attention, right? So a lot of people I know who are models and actors and musicians are more histrionically organized because they like putting on big showy displays to get attention. But maybe they don't have histrionic personality disorder because it's not causing impairment in their relationships, right? But then there are people who just maybe score a little bit higher on a particular trait than other people. So for instance, there's a very well-researched trait called trait sensation seeking. And many people with substance use disorders score very high on this personality trait, or many people that are hypersexual score very high on this trait. And so trait sensation seeking is just a measure of your tendency to experience intense emotions as a result of doing high sensation engaging activities like drugs, food, sex, music, and so on and so forth. So this is the person who will like listen to a song and be extremely moved by the song. Now, having a higher score on trait sensation seeking doesn't mean you're an addict or you're a narcissist or something, but you could have narcissistic personality disorder and score very high on trait narcissism and score very high on trait sensation seeking. So all three could be true at once. And so personality disorders are a real thing. They're 5 to 8%, maybe 9% of the population, which means they're not rare, honestly. There are a lot of people walking around with these various types of like 9 personality issues, essentially, 9 or 10. But that doesn't mean that every person with a personality disorder is acting in a disordered way all the time, right? So thankfully, there are people who are very narcissistically organized. Like the world is much better off because of them, because we need them to be in positions of power. We need them to be performers and creators, right? Like every person that's like a model or a famous musician is probably temperamentally more narcissistically organized. And some of them are even disordered, right? And they're amazing actors or whatever. And that's a really good thing, because what that does is it's like a niche that they fit into, right? So people that have personality extremes are often very useful for society in good measure, right? So if they're in balance with other types of personality differences, for instance, because if you just had a bunch of narcissists running the world, we'd be fucked. But we also need people who are extremely temperamentally conscientious, for instance, to be in positions of power. And imagine if they're temperamentally very narcissistic and conscientious. That means they're probably very interested in doing the right thing, but also getting a lot of attention and feeling important and special. And so they might make good CEOs, for instance. You know, as a consultant, I've helped people understand their personality style and try to use their traits to their advantage, right? Because the problem for a lot of talented and smart and successful people is that they don't actually understand how they're built. It's really a big problem. They didn't have good parents and they didn't have good mentors or professors who could actually slice and dice and understand their personality and then help them use it as a tool, as a weapon, not to be a tool. There's a world of difference between understanding your strengths and using them as a tool versus just being a tool. And many people who are tools could just be better lovers, better husbands, better wives, better business people, better CEOs, better musicians, whatever, if they were less tools and they knew how to use their strengths as tools, right? And so I think the problem with the whole personality disorder discourse is people tend to mix up those with a personality style versus those with a disorder. And even people with a disorder can be very productive and useful for society if they learn how to use their various strengths and differences for the good of themselves and other people. But you know, there's a lot of people who would like to wish that people with borderline or people with narcissistic personality disorder or whatever would just disappear because they're so annoying and they're so self-destructive, right? And we have many examples in the popular media of that. But you can't cure a personality disorder. All you can do is help people become more tempered, more managed, right? And that's why I think being a consultant, for instance, that's why I think it's so important to have someone who understands these things in this nuanced way to help people become more functional in a world where maybe they're actually useful, right? A lot of people think that because you have this particular personality disorder, you are screwed for the rest of your life and you're not valuable for society, but I think you actually are. I think in terms of like niche selection, like evolutionary biologists do and ecologists do. I don't think it's like all good or all bad. I think black and white thinking is stupid in this case. Like, people are complicated, even people with very severe disorders like psychotic disorders, bipolar disorder, personality disorders. They serve a useful purpose in the world. That doesn't mean they always do, but they can if they learn to understand who they are, how they can benefit themselves in the world, and manage their differences so that they don't hurt themselves in the world. But that's a hard task because most people don't have the education or the insight, or they just don't have the patience and frustration tolerance to deal with people who are narcissistically organized or people who are organized in a borderline way. But sometimes these are great lawyers, professors, psychologists, researchers, musicians, artists, unfortunately politicians who I despise. So, just for what it's worth, Dr. Gips, I think it's more complicated than all that. So, for what it's worth. Here's a new one for this week. Dr. James Davies, who I believe I've talked about before. His handle is at jdavies, Davies, PhD. 16 hours ago, he said, I'm going to post this right now. Okay. 16 hours ago, he said, without a psych diagnosis, access to support is denied. The neoliberal state thus demands you accept yourself as dysfunctional before it will help. Capturing your suffering in an ideological move where the fault is located in you rather than in your environment or unmet needs. So again, this is one of those weird false dichotomy experiences. And again, I understand in the insurance world in particular, in managed care, yes, you have to have a diagnosis to be able to use your medical benefits or whatever it is. And, I have all the problems in the world with the managed care model of mental health. It does suck for dozens of reasons, and it is hurting people, and it is keeping people from getting help when they need it, and so on and so forth. Some of that's on clinicians, some of that's on businesses, some of that's on managed care, and so on and so forth. So all that's granted. But let's go back to the first sentence. Without a psych diagnosis, access to support is denied, which is sometimes true. Here's the problem with that, if you don't know. There are many free clinics that exist. There are free support groups that exist, NAMI and many other places, that you can get help if you have no diagnosis, right? Many, many support groups exist. For instance, again, not my favorite, not my preferred place to get help, but it does exist. There are many churches in the country, in the world, that provide free mental health services with their Christian counseling degreed licensed people, right? So there is such a thing as Christian counseling or pastoral counseling that exists, that is a licensable experience. Again, not my preference because I don't understand the training model and I don't think it's as scientifically rigorous as other models. That being said, no problem with you having your faith, etc., etc. So there's a church very close by to where I live, big famous church, that actually has a bunch of support groups for various types of mental health issues. And that's awesome because they're trying to help a bunch of people throughout the entire region get their needs met for free, right? So there's tons of really good examples of mental health services being provided by religious organizations, for which I'm very grateful because tons of people have zero access to support groups like that. That's awesome. Also, example number 2, which maybe Dr. Davies doesn't understand, I don't know. Many people who are part of community colleges, 4-year degree institutions, so on and so forth, have access to college counseling centers. There's tons of them at every counseling center. I don't know why this is such a complicated thing for people to understand, but there's tons and tons and tons of access to all these services, and it's not hard to find. So maybe, just maybe, consider that maybe these services exist. Dr. Davies, I don't know what you're talking about. Where is this coming from? That being said, some clinicians are expensive, and sometimes managed care requires you to have a diagnosis. And so many people do not get the help they need. It's true, because they are trying to get their needs met in a system that doesn't allow them to just start services before there's a diagnosis. I get that, and I think that's stupid to some degree. That being said, it's also important to be clear that many people who think they need therapy do not need therapy. There are many people that I call, and my friends call, the worried well. The worried well are a real phenomenon. There are many people who do not have significant psychiatric, psychological distress or significant impairment, right? There are many people that are going through what I would call life sucks disorder. They have a bad case of life sucks disorder. They just lost someone they loved. They just lost their job. They just got in a bad car accident. Whatever it is, all of which is appropriately stressful and concerning or even traumatic. But you don't need therapy in many cases because, generally speaking, you have psychological resilience, you're smart, you have friends, you have family, you have a husband, a wife, whatever. You have the support you need, so you don't need therapy. Like I was saying earlier, for Nick Tabor's post, some people have all the healthy relationships they need and they don't need therapy. They have access to a church, they have access to a support group, they have access to AA, whatever. They have access to so many people that can help them, and they're just neurotic, and they just don't get that they're okay, and they think of themselves as sicker than they actually are. So, Dr. Davies, there are people who don't need therapy who seek it out. There are many worried well who have a paid best friend. They have life coaches or whatever the fuck professionals, and it's just gross. It's gross to go get help when you don't need it, and I don't get it. I just don't get it. It makes no sense to me. And what the hell is happening with my camera right now? It's really zooming in. It's fascinating. You can see like if I shaved or not. This is probably my best angle, honestly. Or is it? You gonna keep up with me? I love this. All right, let's see how this goes. That's fun. So again, worried well. It's a real thing. You don't need to go to therapy if you're the worried well. You're going to be okay. And it's honestly just kind of fun when people put out these straw men, because it's like they've never seen patients, or they never know that there are systems outside of what they think exist. Because like there's tons of free help, but whatever. That doesn't mean there's enough therapists and enough psychiatrists, but there's tons of free help. So anyways, I think that that's probably enough ranting for today. I really badly appreciate you coming out and chatting with me, because this is a lot of fun. And I think these rants might hopefully potentially help people. Maybe, possibly. So thank you all for coming out and chatting with me and joking around. The purpose of this podcast, just to reiterate, is just to provide a new perspective, a different perspective, so that you have a more informed consumer base. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of bad clinicians out there. There's a lot of crappy podcasts out there. There's a lot of Instagram, Instafluencer, therapist, counselor, coach people, and it's just disgusting. And they don't know what they're talking about, but they want to help people, or they want to be Svengalis or gurus or whatever. And I just have no interest in that, because like there's tons of good professionals you can go see that are not me, that think differently than me, because life is complicated and people are complicated and your needs might be different than what I'm describing. So I want you to be the most informed possible consumer of mental health services that's possible. It's just, there's so much crap out there. There's so much garbage, so many fads, and there's so much that doesn't need to be done. You know, many problems, many clinical issues are easier to manage than the gurus make it out to be. But there's also many simple things we can do to be healthy, like food, diet, lifestyle, exercise, sleep, all these things that you can do to help yourself. So please don't just focus on therapy. Please also take care of your body, because your body is part of what regulates your mind. So thank you for coming out today. Please, if you are new, say hi. Jeet Patra says hello. Hello, Jeet. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please share this with anyone and everyone who believes they need mental health help so they can be more informed. Please spread the word. I'm trying to help as many people as possible so that I can, get rid of the garbage out there, and B, make sure more people are helped appropriately. As always, I end these podcasts with a dad joke. And so, without further delay, here is today's dad joke for episode 18 of UnShrink Me. So I once worked with this patient who is a mathematician, really smart guy, really smart guy. And he presented as very anxious. And so we did the first session and we got to know each other. And after about 10 minutes, it became clear that he certainly had a phobia, because what he described to me were classic symptoms of a phobia, including like excessive anxiety that doesn't fit the context. And his phobia, unfortunately, happened at his university. He's a mathematician at a university, and he was having a damn hard time teaching his students. Now, some of this is because he was a new professor, but also this is because he had a particular aversion to the number 7, which was like a first for me. I've worked with lots of people with a lot of different kind of trauma and shame and all these things that create like phobic responses. But this was the first time in my career that I'd heard someone who was afraid of the number 7. So I had to ask him, like, sir, what happened that you are terrified of the number 7? And he kind of like looked at his shoes for a second, and I thought maybe like I offended him or something. And there was a pause. There was like a pregnant pause. There was a silence that lasted for at least maybe a minute. And I sat there silently and just let him be silent, which is what you do, right? And I, again, reiterated the question. I was like, can you please help me understand, why, sir, are you afraid of the number 7? And he looked up at me kind of sheepishly and sadly, and he said, well, because 7, 8, 9. All right, have a good rest of your day. Take care of your health. Eat good food. Have good sex. Have good fun. Be good to yourselves. Be good to other people. And I will see you next week. Bye.